Good morning. Good morning. Welcome you all to the third day of our FDP on research paper writing and publication in SCOPUS Web of Science journals. Today's session is on research methodology in quantitative method. I'll start with a quote from Belgian biochemist Christian de Duguay, who once said, "The advantage of the analytical approach is that it is widely applicable and it can provide a considerable amount of quantitative information, even with a relatively poor resolving power." To briefly define quantitative methodology, it is a dominant research framework in the social sciences. It refers to a set of strategies, techniques, and assumptions used to study psychological, social, and economic processes through the exploration of numeric patterns. Quantitative research gathers a range of numeric data. Today's session will be conducted by Dr. Munmun Ghosh, who is a PhD in statistics, is an associate of professor at Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication from Symbiosis International University, Pune, India. Welcome, ma'am. Her current research interests and work involve integrating technology into society, most notably researching how people use digital media to configure themselves, their social relations. She's working actively in the area of aging and gender and multidisciplinary areas. Working on ground and in-field experience has been her core strength of over a decade. She is a core quantitative researcher analyzing digital and big data for social research using quantitative or mixed method techniques. Recently, she has also launched her book, Business Statistics, using Excel, SPSS, and R, published by Sen Engage. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mamita. It was a kind introduction. So, good morning, everyone. I assume you are listening to me, although I couldn't see much of you apart from Momita, but assuming that you are also listening as well as.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. We are
Very
listening.
good morning. Thank you. Yes. Although I'm a firm believer that even we are in Zoom, we can have interactive session because I think COVID has taught us very well how interactive session can be conducted in Zoom. And since I assume that this is a FDP conducted by School of Media and Communication, as well as I am a faculty of media and communication. So the key over here, or the, what do I say, in a Venn diagram, or the intersection point for all of us is communication. So if we don't interact or communicate, then the FDP is not much of a success. So rather than me talking about it, I would assume that let's have a two-way communication and let's try to enjoy this heavy loaded 3 hours, which has been overburdened to you, thinking that you will be learning a lot of quantitative. But rather, I would like to understand and brush up more about what you have learned and how we can actually apply this to our regular work, and how we can do a lot of these work and apply it to our research, basically, and how to go ahead with our research work that is in our mind. So, Mamita, I'm assuming that here all are professors.
Scholars and professors.
Okay, cool. So their journey of research has already begun. I mean, some with choice or some by virtue of your work profile. Yeah. So even if you don't choose to be, but your work profile needs some basic requirement to get fulfilled. So just give me a moment and let me ask to share my screen. I hope I can share my screen, right? Yeah. Yeah, I can. Yes. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Visible.
Yeah. It's visible to everyone? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Thank you. So, yeah, research methodology quantitative. So when we say quantitative, there are a lot of inhibitions in our mind, thinking that quantitative is a hardcore number crunching way, or is a hardcore number crunching technique, and we are like sort of how we will juggle through and how we will work in that, and what do we get out of it, how to work through it. So there are a lot of questions that comes in our head. But if I have to tell you that quantitative is just a methodology, and we have to know the different nuances of quantitative to give you an understanding about how we can perform this under the bigger umbrella of research methodology. Because research methodology, when we talk about it, we all know that it's a broader term. It includes many techniques. So, in the last 2 days, I'm assuming that since we have reached in the third day of quantitative, you have been given a fair amount of experience about how qualitative research and other what is the broad area of research that you conduct. Okay. So here, but let me tell you, you may find it a little repetitive with the previous session, because for me to start quantitative or to build the basics about quantitative, I have to start with some basics of research and research methodology and where from quantitative comes in. Because quantitative do not work in silo. It works in the broader picture and the bigger picture, and you have to understand first where it comes from, and then we can pick on the technologies, or we can pick on the methodologies or any other integration that works together. So you might have encountered a lot of definition of research so far. So how about these definitions? When we say research, what do you mean? Is this the same thing that happened with each one of you at one point in time when you think or when you talk about research?
I think it's best that if people can interact. Yes, anyone interested, please, you can go ahead with interaction, please.
Yeah, let's keep the session very interactive, because no GAN is complete and I'm not here to give you any GAN. Come on. I'm just your contemporary. Momita has just made me very big shot. I'm not at all. So please, let's make it more interactive. It will be more fun then. Otherwise, it will be more intimidating. Yes.
Yeah, hello ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is Ghosh I think we chaired the session for a previous event by Adamas. I was there. I had done something about language revitalization. So there was a lot of confusion when I was presenting the paper about the framework I had used. Am I audible now?
Your voice is coming hazy, actually, not very clear.
Okay. So I think now the research that I am trying to pursue, I think mostly it will be ethnographic. Like when I look at it, but like maybe can I use like qualitative approaches at least like in a pilot study kind of situation or something? Like it is about language revitalization more. However, I myself, to be very honest, I kind of get confused. What should I do? As in, like I try to convey something to the people to whom I am presenting my ideas, but then like that is where I'm not like able to make up my mind. Should I go for like anything quantitative at all, or should I straight away jump into like an ethnographic, qualitative, and like only observation and
Oh,
repetition.
yes, that's a very long-term goal. At the first, when we just suppose you are in the beginning of your research work, what is the feeling? Isn't it what is shown in the PPT? I mean, like when we come
Yeah.
across research, sometimes in a very beginner, I feel that when I back in 2005 or 2006, when I thought about doing research, I was totally clueless. What does research even mean? I mean, does it mean like searching in Google, or what do research paper even look like? What do people even, is it a essay that people look like, and how even we frame the research? So then in my very own language, I came across the definition of research. Yeah. Does this happen to us also?
Yes, it happens with most of us.
Yes, so it's the irony of life that when we talk about research, then we find it that okay, yes, it's like we keep on searching so many things, and then we digress through our because I think his name is showing Asmita, who just interacted with me right now, and he said that he wanted to do ethnography, but he's very confused how to go about it, and he doesn't know, and there are a lot of studies. So we generally, when we say research or when we explore in our topics of research, we keep on browsing so many research paper sites and end up just having what do I say? Just end up having reading more than 6 hours, exploring so many things, and then getting confused. And when we are about to write, then we write what? Only one sentences and two references. And in trust me, in most of the time, the two references were also very wrongly written owing to the citations way how we have to cite it, APA or Harvard and all, to figuring out that we also write the references wrong. So after all this irony that whether research is browsed through Google or research needs to be from writing an essay or spending so much of time for writing one sentence, do we still want to do research? Are we still eager to conduct the research? Now, the answer to most of it is no, but we have to because we are in a profession which is very keen on research. And incidentally, for me, it is not only professional hazard, but also an interest. So, for me, I understand and I love doing research in the areas. And I assume when we keep on spending so many time on research, we are bound to generate that interest, but how to channelize those interests for our work is what we will look into. So, and the next point, what I would like you to just tell me before we start. So let's get to know each other. I may not be interested in your current profile, what you are doing, since Momita said that you are mostly research scholar and faculty. So I assume you are a faculty over different institutes. If I may know, what's your expectation from this workshop? It will be better for me to help you through. Although there is a set way, but still some interaction on let's set our expectation, let's interact, let's know each other, and let's become friends. Anyone?
Anyone, please.
Yeah, hello, ma'am. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
voice
that
is
was
again very, yeah.
oh, okay. Maybe, ma'am, I like try to. There might be an issue with my equipment. So, as a ma'am, I would like to have a little bit of like clarity on how people frame their research. Like, I know what I want to do, but I'm like completely confused about how one has to go about it. Like, I'm not able to kind of look at
Yeah.
the execution part. So, I would like to understand that part. And the other thing is, man, interdisciplinary, because there's so much emphasis nowadays on interdisciplinary research. How would we kind of like collaborate with people who are not from our disciplines, who might be in other universities, might not be in India, some other country? Those kind of things, man. Thank you. That would be my comment.
May I know your name?
I'm Keshav Vivek. I interacted with you, man. Keshav Vivek.
Okay,
We
okay,
had
okay.
on the international conference, we had actually
Yeah,
interacted, we had chaired that session now.
yeah. Sure, sure. Thank you, thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I am getting messages, but I will be very keen if you can just open your mic and you can just speak. Yes, sir. Rakesh, sir, please go ahead.
So my name is Rakesh Goswami. It's showing, the surname is showing incorrect. And I teach at Indian Institute of Mass Communication, New Delhi.
Okay.
My expectation from this is that every time I read and attend a session on research, I realize how little I know about it. So just to increase my knowledge and being want to becoming better at doing research, because I've had a industry experience. I've been a journalist for 25 years before I took the plunge into academics. So this is one area where I think I always lack, and that is the whole point of joining this course. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I hope by end of this, you will be at least able to map some basics and use it in your work, day-to-day work, research work.
There's a Lakshmi,
Hmm.
nuances of research, as we have idea about research, but when it comes to technically do it, we become confused. So we hope to know more.
Yeah. Yes, I got the writing of Lakshmi. Anyone else? Okay. So I don't think so. People are much keen on interacting and making friends. They are here to do their business. So let's come to the business. Yeah. So yes, Jug group, you can please don't raise your hand. You can just open your mic and just speak.
Yeah, please go ahead. We can't hear you.
Jug group Singh Balhara. We can't hear you, sir. Please. Okay. I think yeah, he has put anything on chat. No, Paramita has put in chat. I'm a communication trainer for last 15 years, but now that I'm on research, I'm a bit confused regarding how to go about it categorically. Yeah. Okay, Paramita. Okay. So I think this workshop will help you understand all of this a little bit step by step. But before I go ahead with the further, let me give you a brief understanding of how I'm looking at this workshop. Since it's a quantitative workshop, it's very important that you also handle the data. So I have a data set which I have prepared, and I want you to go with me along with the data set and do it. But before that, I have divided in three parts. So the first part will be understanding the basics of research, because I believe if you don't understand the foundation of research and some concepts which are always confusing, because here I could see many responses which says that they know the basics or they know something about research, but when they come to work or when they have to apply it, they get confused. So that confusion will be eliminated when your foundations on when your concepts and basics are very right. Although I will not say for myself that I know everything, I always consider myself to be work in progress. So whatever work I have done and is in progress, I will try and share with you in a very simple, plain, jargon-free language. Do let me know if you have questions, and do let me know if you have any queries. I would much appreciate, rather than doing so much of effort and putting in chat, you might raise your hand and open your mic, at least if you don't want to open your cameras, and can ask me the question directly. Although I have also segmented the part 3 as the Q&A section, where I will be more than happy to take your questions. And here we will start with first understanding the concepts and the approaches and discussing, since it's a quantitative section. So although there will be qualitative, but we will focus more on quantitative and the way how we can use it. And we will talk about first descriptive research, which is the foundation of any research work, because descriptive act as the building block where we have to understand where do we use to describe our data. And then we will, in the parts 2, will go at hypothesis testing, specifically inferential statistics, and tell you how many tests and what type of tests are been put or used in our research methodology and in our research concept. and which type of test becomes suitable to what type of work. And lastly, we will also try to apply regression to our work. So I will, if we will try to figure out a data set and try to understand, because I think in your social sciences domain, regression is a concept that you will use very much, and how to use it and how to interpret the results is what we will look into, and what are the condition when we use regression. But before we move on to, let's move on to the next concept of how and what do we think research is. So understanding the research concept. So when I mean understanding the research concept, these are the things that actually comes to our mind. And the things are, number one, what is your research problem? Now you are in the third day, and since you are professors, I'm assuming that you are already aware that what is your research problem. This is not, I don't think so. This is a problem of anyone over here for understanding what actually is your research problem, which, or the second question, some might be confused about how to write your methods and methodology for research. Now, the question that I have put in the star mark was actually my inquisitiveness when I was a beginner researcher. I always used to assume that methods and methodologies are the same. And when people used to talk about, okay, I have used this methods under the methodology, then I never used to come across to the conclusion that, okay, why he or she is talking that methods and methodology? Because literal meaning aren't the same, right? Third is, what is the right technique to use? I think many of you will be confused in this section, that in quantitative also, what is the right technique that I can use? And fourth is how to understand where to use the particular technique. So my point here, or my presence here, will be to guide you. Although I will talk about the research problem, because I cannot guide you until and unless you are not clear about your research problem. Any technique or any quantitative technique you can't by heart. You have to understand the logic, the preset condition, the required, what do I say, the required variables, and how these variables can be put into different studies using quantitative methodology. So that is very important. So the right technique to be used, and how to understand that, okay, under this condition, I will use this quantitative methodology. Say A quantitative methodology, B quantitative methodology. So we will talk about it. Next is, let's do this. Yeah. So, to begin with, we all are aware of these three approaches of research. And we have gone through these approaches of research multiple times in our life. So, when we talk about ethnography, when we talk about thematic study, when we talk about in-depth interviews, when we talk about discourse analysis, all these studies comes under qualitative research. So qualitative research is all about what? It's about exploring the data, understanding certain individuals, certain groups, certain communities, certain behaviors, but not through only data or collection of mass data, but going in depth into or near to them, and then trying to figure out their behavior, what problem they are facing, how they are reacting. All this comes under qualitative research. And trust me, these are approaches of research. We keep on saying that we use these lingos as or qualitative, quantitative mixed methods in our day-to-day life, but we never understand their placement properly. So today's session, along with quantitative research, although the focus will more on quantitative as well as mixed method, I will also make it correct towards understanding the concepts and the foundation. Allow me a minute. So the next is, here I have said, when you do a qualitative research, it means that it's a good and you have done your basic exploration. Moving to quantitative research. So nowadays, when you are handling data set and when you are working on research paper, merely doing quantitative research is also not going to suffice. So here you have to also know qualitative and quantitative, where your objective is to test some theories and examines the variables in the study, which can be. So when the matter of understanding comes, then exploration or qualitative is good. But when the matter of testing any approach, any variables, any study, or any factors or any hypothesis comes, here, or any theory or any variables of the theory, when the word test is used, then quantitative research comes. In today's world, while writing a research paper or getting it accepted by reputed journal, particularly Scopus and Web of Science, it is very important that you go ahead with mixed method research. Mixed method means it's a good blend of qualitative as well as quantitative. Now you have to know which portion of your work can be qualitative and how that can lead to quantitative, and then further drawing the inference, or which portion first can be quantitative and then that can lead through a qualitative research and then can go ahead with your what do we say, your implications of the study. Also, finally, you also have to know whether you are mixing, as this is mixed method. Mixed method doesn't merely means you are mixing both the methods and coming out with some outcome, because it has certain approaches to it and the way towards it, right? So that's what it said. When you do qualitative, it's good. When you do quantitative, 60% of your work has been taken care. But the best solution to hit the target or hit the bullseye is you do a qualitative plus quantitative, good plus 60%, so that you can go beyond 100% in your research. Now, many of you are aware, but still I am going to just give you a very brief about the worldviews and how the interconnection between the research. Why it is important to understand the interconnectivity of the research, because until and unless we are aware of this interconnectivity, we will never be able to use the right technique. Because many of you in the chat also have talked about it, that you want to understand where to use what. So let's go into and let's revise a bit about our basics that we have learned or we have known so far. So first, before we come to approaches of research, there are worldviews, philosophies or worldviews. And based on those philosophies comes our approaches. And based on those approaches comes our design. And based on those design comes our methods. So this is a chain. So had I had been physically, I would have given you a loop and a diagram which shows that first is the philosophies, which makes the approaches to come. Then comes our research design. And from the research design, whatever we select, comes our methodology or methods, research methods. And these all sections altogether is our methodology, research methodology. So let's come to, as we are all aware, there are 4 philosophical worldviews which comes into picture and which are integral in understanding the research journey. Although there are many worldviews, but these worldviews are something that we look upon. I will go very briefly, considering that you all know it well, but still just to revise so that we can start with the concept very well and you can understand how we weave through the entire stuff. So when we say post-positivist is the most oldest worldview ever. And here it includes, or this worldview talks about testing the theories. So we have a theory, we try to test the theory, or we try to test the variables of the theory and understand the relationship towards it. That is usually what post-positivist worldview talks about. So here, post-positivist, then comes constructivist. Constructivist is something which talks about the behavior. So we try to understand the behavior, attitude of an individual or a group through our study, then all those comes under constructivist worldviews. So constructivist worldview. So when we say that our worldview is constructivist, by default, we are talking towards the approach which is the qualitative. And when I'm saying our worldview or the philosophy is post-positivist, by default, we are talking about quantitative research. Now here, post-positivist and constructivist are the philosophies which are in silo. There is no interconnection of both of them, right? So here post-positivist is solely quantitative and constructivist is solely qualitative. So they work in silo. There are no interconnection in them, right? Transformative is something where there are a lot of what do I say? There are a lot of examples that I can give you of the transformative worldview where the research is done over many decades to bring on that change in the society, right? So these are transformative researches. So the legitimization of homosexuality, the queer theory, then the critical discourse theory, then the gender narrative, and then there are other discourses that has been there are aging theory. So all these theory, when these theories come, they are transformative work which has been done to bring certain change in the society. That's come from that transformative worldview. And lastly is pragmatic. So here, for our studies or for our work, when you are starting any research work, it is very important to understand or first interconnect the worldviews. Because when you subscribe to a worldview, then you automatically choose an approach which is interconnected to the worldview. Then it is then automatically you go to the design which is again interconnected to that worldview. And from the design, each design has a subscribed methods. So if you subscribe the worldview or the philosophy of your study well, then you are automatically, your study is driven by one after another factor. Moving on to pragmatic worldview, this is the worldview which is associated with mixed method. So here we are saying that, okay, post-positivist talks about only testing the empirical studies or the variables under the theories, and constructivist talks about studying the individual behavior, understanding, and also talks about understanding the behavior, attitude, functionality of a community. Then what can be done to merge both of them, and we can study both the individuality as well as also test them. That is the pragmatic worldview. So if you consider, or if you only want to test the variable of your study, go for your post-positivist approach, which will take you to the quantitative. If you are keen on studying constructivist, then you can go ahead with understanding the behavior. Ethnography is also a behavioral understanding where you gauge with time the behavior of the community, of the people towards us in certain condition. So that come under constructivist philosophy. And lastly, pragmatic. If you want to do a blend of both, then go ahead with pragmatic, which will bring you to the research approach of mixed method. Now, I'm not going to qualitative research methods or the design here. I will focus on quantitative base because this and a little bit on mixed method because that also includes quantitative. So I will give you a little idea about mixed method also. But primarily, I will talk about quantitative research. So here you know that constructivist, qualitative, and then the designs of qualitative as well as the methods. I will talk here about post-positivist and pragmatic. So when your approach is post-positivist, then the design approach is quantitative and the design is quantitative research design. So under quantitative research design, there are experimental, non-experimental, descriptive, and correlational. These are the four research design. Don't worry, don't go ahead in writing. I will hand over this PPT to the organizers and it's all over here. So focus on listening, and if you have any doubts, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. I will be more than happy to take. So here, designs for quantitative are experimental, non-experimental, and correlational and descriptive. We will go ahead with all of this one after another. And lastly, the research methods that we used for this are either we go for setting up experiments under experimental study. So there will be experiments to test the behavior. Booth School Chicago has their behavioral lab where they test through experiments in different studies in behavioral studies to understand how consumer, how audience respond to different setups, and the people who are going through those tests are not aware of it. So they divide the sample or the people in two groups. One is a control group, another one is a treatment group. So the control group is given all sort of congenial environment and they record their responses based on their research problem. Similarly, the experimental group or the treatment group goes to or put in a different setting based on the research problems, and they try to gauge their responses and their behavior. That is experimental setup. Non-experimental are we set up the experiments. Non-experimental basically are our survey tools, the usual tools. What we do, we create a questionnaire, we run a Google form in our social profiles, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Facebook, and we try to get the responses. And then we wonder that how about going or doing a analysis to it, right? That is a survey tool, which is non-experimental, right? And we do data collection, interpretations, and all. Correlational design. Correlational design is basically we try to find out the association between the variables. So I have variable A, I have variable B. So I have both the variables which are quantitative. I want to find out the association between the variables. Then I try to find out or take up a correlational design. Now that association can be devised by finding out the correlation, whether the relation is strong, whether the relation is positive, whether the relation is moderate, or it is weak, that I can find out. Descriptive research design in quantitative is the most used research design. Yeah. So in descriptive research design, what do? We describe our data. So if I have to ask you, how do you describe yourself? Suppose if I ask any one of you who is participating in this FDP, I ask you, how do you describe yourself? So the answer will be, okay, my name is this, I teach here, I have this much of experience, I have my background. Some of you have described yourself, you have 15 years in communication industry, you were there for a substantial number of years as a journalist, and then you have shifted to academia. So you usually describe yourself through your what you have done, what's your introduction, and how you are progressing, and how you foresee your future in a certain aspects or certain area. Similarly, data also describes them. How data describes them, I will talk about in the later section. But descriptive design actually talks about whatever data you have collected in your study, how to describe them. And do remember, I'm talking about now post-positivist worldview, right? So here in the post-positivist worldview, I'm talking about the quantitative approaches and the designs of the quantitative approaches. So once that is done, describing of the data is done, then we go ahead with different methods that we will imply to collect our data set. So if I'm been allowed, let's little move ahead and see what are the type of research that we do and what are the type of variables that come across. So this is the criteria for selecting a type of research are: what is your objective of your study? What type of data or what is the nature of the data you want to collect? What type of finding you want to do? Are you interested in doing certain experimental manipulations here? So manipulation here do not literally mean the manipulation. Here means experimental setting up and the approaches involved in each of that. Yes, Shai, good question. Correlation gives you half big data. You can't actually, correlation is not at all an inferential statistics. To test it on the population, you have to do hypothesis testing as well as inferential statistics so that you can infer for your population. So correlation is just coming under, it's just like talking or describing your data. So I ask Shayak that what's your name, where do you stay, where do you work? That is correlation. But if I want to know more about his proficiency in any subject, what he teach, and how much he know in depth, then I have to go ahead with inferential statistics and testing the hypothesis so that I can infer more about Shayak. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So these are the type of research. So when you are thinking or formulating the research problem, then ask this question to yourself that what type of nature or what will be my nature of data? What will be my findings? How do I look at finding my data? Am I interested in exploring only, or am I interested in doing some explanatory work, or am I interested in going beyond description? Right. And also whether it's a cross-sectional approach or it's a longitudinal approach where I will take data from after a repeated period of interval where my data patterns will change or my intersection with the research will change. All this needs to be asked by yourself. So if you are, suppose you are working on the homosexuality area on queer theory, then what happens is it is very fundamental research, although there has been a lot of research that has also come up in that area, but mostly are fundamental research because you cannot just collect data and you can't just infer your results based on a lot of surveys. You have to talk to the community. Uh, you have to talk to people to understand what is their understanding, what is their input about the research. All this has to be understood through fundamental research. That's why we go for qualitative approach, and we are not interested in setting up any experiment, although it is experimental. If we are interested in setting that experiment, will be very focused and it cannot include many data points, and it has to be on if I want to do it, go back to that community over a period of time to understand what progress they have made. So all these are very important while setting up our research. So basically here I would like you to go through this visualization, which will help you get an understanding of how you look at the data set. I'm sorry, it has moved. Yeah. So when you are working on your exploratory or descriptive research vis-a-vis exploratory primary and secondary research, just see how the difference in patterns comes across in your study. So when in silo you are working only about describing the data, then you look at the application characteristics, the definitions, the advantages of using those, and you try to portray these many features in your data set. But when you are majority in our research work, just down below in the left, what we see over here, we portray mostly into primary or secondary research. So we start with the secondary research, we explore literature, we look into cases, we try to find out online searches, some secondary databases based on our study, what we are getting. And then based on our research questions, either we set up survey or polls for quantitative, or we set up interviews, focus groups, or we set up experiments through observation. And also observational study is also a core part of your qualitative research. So what we can see, and if we blend each of them, survey polls followed by an interview, survey or a poll followed by a focus group, or survey or a poll followed by an observational, that becomes mixed method study or the design that we actually combine and work towards. So here, this is a fantastic way of showing you how a qualitative and quantitative research works. So basically, we keep on fighting with each other, qualitative, bada ki quantitative. For me, I will say that there is no bada chota. Everything is like it comes one with other. Quantitative and without qualitative doesn't make sense. And similarly, qualitative without quantitative also in recent scenario of research isn't going to make any sense. So it's better we should know the advantages and limitations of the both, and as well as where to use it. So if I have to tell you, so qualitative research focuses is not about generating ideas or developing or doing any theories. It focuses, it's concentrate only. Qualitative research is more about the exploring the research question. Here, quantitative research is more focused on considering a theory and then identifying variables of the theory and through literature reviews. And then when you identify the variables considering your research, you create a framework, frame your hypothesis, and once the hypothesis has been framed, then test it. So there, the analysis is coming through different tests, whereas in qualitative, you summarize and classify the analysis through different analysis like textual analysis, narrative analysis, thematic analysis. So there are different analysis techniques to it. The expression is also different. In case of quantitative, when you want to express your data, it should be in graphs, it should be in pictorial, which talks about the spread of the data, which talks about the expression of the data. But in qualitative, since your data point is your text, you or words, you describe mostly through conversations or through words. These days, we go for content analysis or we go for sentiment analysis in qualitative. That also we do particularly, although both of them also have a quanti side to it, sentiment as well as content analysis, but we also go ahead with the expression through these sort of analysis. When you are doing qualitative research and trying to find out the basic understanding of the individual, there reaching out to many individual to understand or getting an in-depth understanding is not possible. So by virtue of the study method or method technique, qualitative samples are bound to be lesser, and we stop. There is no what do I say, there is no upper limit of qualitative that sample size should be this, say 100, 200 or 30, 40, 50, no upper limit. We say in qualitative research that till we met the saturation point, we keep on interviewing, doing the focus group. Now, what does the saturation point means? Saturation points here means that we are getting the repetitive answers or what we have already got in our studies. But in quantitative, our sample size has to be very large. Why? Because when we talk about sample has to be a representation of a population, and we cannot test anything till we have a good representation of the population which we are studying. So that's why by virtue of the techniques, quantitative samples are greater than the qualitative samples. Now, quantitative questions are very closed. Either you ask a question, give them the 4 options, and the best way is what we do in majority of the research in quantitative studies. Based on our research problem, we create questions and we ask people to respond on Likert scale. So 1 to 5, 1 to 7, and 1 to 9, 3 types of Likert scales, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. Similarly, 1 being the lowest, 7 being the highest, and 1 being the lowest, 9 being the highest. So these are the 3 ways when we capture our data for quantitative research. Similarly, for qualitative, we do not have closed question. So what we do is we have open-end inquiry, because these are, you are trying to gauge or you are trying to in-depth understand the behavior or the pattern or the feelings of the participant in the study, where you can't put the participant in a straight-jacketed format. You have to engage in conversation and keep on probing them. So when you are doing that, in that case, it cannot be a closed-ended question. It has to be an open-ended inquiries. And similarly, when we are testing the data to assess that whether the right question has been framed or not, whether the right methods has been used or not, or the right technique has been used or not. So we have to test the reliability of the data, which is very easier in case of quantitative because I have a larger data set and there are different, since post-positivist is a very evolved domain. So there are different ways of testing the reliability and validity of the questions, reliability and validity of the answers, and also the responses, right? But for understanding the qualitative data, here triangulation is one of the methods where we used different coding as well as intercoder reliability is used, but it is little difficult. Why? Because the complexity increases because of the vastness of the discussion that happens in qualitative research to come across and to find out the actual reliability. So it may happen that your interview, you are probing and you are asking question and interview have moved till 1.5 hours. But when you are transcribing the data, the content came in a very smaller because there your activation point to start the interview and start the discussion was very high. So there you will find that understanding the reliability is a very challenge in qualitative, but still there this domain is also evolving and we keep on doing some reliability tests through it, but it is not as challenging and quantitative and it is more easy, as well as we can easily test the reliability of the questions by in pilot study we just pass on the questions to experts based on a research problem, and then we do the quantitative reliability and validity testing of our questionnaire, survey questionnaire before we induct it to the main study. We have already talked about the method. It can be case study, ethnography, in-depth interviews in qualitative, and examples are experimental and any type of quantitative measures that you work. So here I have already discussed this, what type of designs you have, experimental, correlational and descriptive. So description is all about describing averages, trends. Correlational is all about how strongly the variables of our study is related, and experimental is test the relationship or the cause of the effect on the study. So here I create the study into groups and conduct it in environment, in labs, in situations, in context where we move ahead. So now just giving you a little bit now, moving ahead with qualitative, quantitative is mostly done. I would also like to give you a basic idea about mixed method research, because as I say, this is the new way. And if you don't conduct your work on quantitative or mixed method, then it will not be very easy for you to publish researchers. So you also have to understand what are the procedures or what are the types of mixed method design. So here we usually, when we do mixed method research, or then there are 3 famous designs that is very widely used in mixed method studies. Number 1 is we say it as sequential explanatory. Number 2 is sequential exploratory. And lastly is concurrent research or convergent research design. So when you come across these 3 designs, by default, if you see these type of 3 designs has been used in the research paper that literature you are studying for your study, just understand that this is a mixed method design. So when we say explanatory sequential or sequential explanatory, it means that the person is trying to tell you that they have conducted quantitative research in the first stage of the study, followed by a qualitative method. So they have created a hypothesis, they have created a conceptual framework through the theories or the theories from the studies they are doing. They created variables, they used variables in the study, they created a conceptual framework. Once the conceptual framework is done, they have conducted a survey and they have tried to validate the conceptual framework through the survey. Now, whatever they got through the survey result, whether all the variables or the hypotheses were significant or non-significant, then from the variables, they also create a in-depth idea, in-depth interview guide, discussion guide, and then they go ahead on understanding in the second stage of their study with through qualitative research to gauge more in-depth into their study. Now, here the caution point is the people who has responded to you in their survey, the qualitative interviews, focus groups, or any discussions should happen with those participant or those respondents only. So you cannot, those who are not a part of your survey, you cannot go out of the way to respond or to interview other participants. So in the second stage to whom you are in doing interviews or you are doing your what do I say, your focus group or any other techniques in the second stage, those selected people are already a part of your survey, and you have a strong rationale of why you have chosen them for the next stage of your study. So quantitative in the first stage and qualitative in the second stage, and then writing the implication and discussion, validating your study variables first through quantitative and then through qualitative. That is sequential explanatory or exploratory. Sequential explanatory or explanatory sequential, whatever way you say it. Now coming to sequential exploratory, as the term say exploratory, here the first stage is qualitative. So you create a research question, you do a pre-pilot, you do a pilot study, and then you go ahead and do some FGDs and in-depth interviews. Once you do that, then what happens is you got the study variables from explorations of the study. So now you check the study variables, try to create your hypothesis from the variable, and from that area, that aspect. So suppose you have conducted interviews for with 20 individuals, 30 individuals in that area, and then you reach a saturation point, and then you stop your qualitative study there, analyze it, get your study variables that, okay, I might have thought that my study variables will include attitude, behavior, say response rate and all of that. But there comes in another fourth variable from the qualitative study. So I revise my framework, I revise my the methods over here, I revise my questions of the survey, and then I expand. So that 20, 30 people who are a part of the qualitative study again will be a part of survey, and I will expand my survey to masses of that area or the geography or the locations where we are conducting the study. And then I will try to come up with the conclusion of the study. Here also I'm using qualitative and quantitative to discuss my finding and build the data set and as well as talk about it. But the concern here is that we are more interested in doing the qualitative first and then moving ahead with quantitative. Yes, Shaik, you can go ahead.
Yeah, ma'am, actually, what I did for my PhD, because you are there in the community, that I actually collected the data, as I showed you. I collected from the three entrepreneurs for 3 years. Then I built up my variables. I tested it. I actually built my theoretical framework. Now I tested the hypothesis based on the variables, and now I'm going for FGD. So what it should be? I mean, it's sequential. I know, but should be. So first I did quantitative, then I'm going for qualitative for FGD and all. So
yeah, so it's first quantitative. You have done survey, and then
yeah.
you are building the variables and doing the quantitative. So
I-
it's sequential explanatory.
Explanatory, okay. Because I also tested, I used correlations to find out the relationship between the variables. And now I'm going to collect the last phase of data, which would be on from the FGDs. So it's explanatory, sequential explanatory.
Explanatory.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So that will be a design. And lastly, the concurrent design is, or convergent design is, where now in both the phases of the design where mixed method is used, either sequential explanatory or sequential exploratory, one key point is one is done after the other. So whether it is qualitative in the exploratory part, sequential exploratory, that is conducted in the first phase, and then we go ahead with the quantitative. For explanatory, we have seen that we are doing quantitative in the first phase, then followed by qualitative. But in concurrent or convergent, both are done together. So simultaneously, the data will be collected both from, what do I say, quantitative through survey as well as from your interview. So that will go ahead. And then we try to merge both the data. So the analysis will go hand in hand for the framework that we have created, conceptual framework that we have created. And then we try to validate our study variables simultaneously through quantitative. What is my validation coming? So I might find that, okay, there are few study variables which are coming non-significant in the quantitative study, and those variables vis-a-vis when I was conducting a qualitative research, I could see that the response of the participants towards those variables in my in-depth questions or focus group was also very, what do I say? It's not very great. They were not very comfortable in answering. So I can understand why the variable has not shown a significant result even in quantitative study. So there, we usually, when we do our research in PhDs, we usually do not go ahead much with concurrent research. Why? Because if you are not very much expert in handling both the type of data simultaneously, because it needs a little bit of expertise in handling. So if you are not very comfortable, then concurrent designs in mixed method to maintain and take through is a challenge. So we usually prefer one after another. Yes, Ipshita, you can go ahead.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, hi.
I am working in Adamas University and I'm doing my PhD in health communication. So my like geographical domain is Sundarban. So it's health communication in the disaster-prone area in Sundarban. So, ma'am, I'm about to start my data collection now. So I was just thinking that I would start with a survey and then in this next phase I'll do with FGD. But, ma'am, what would you suggest? Because it's a very ethnocentric community. Should I start with an FGD first and then a survey, or should I do a survey first and then an FGD?
You have answered it for yourself, because now you should not do a survey in an area which is so sensitive. And first
Okay.
survey, because here you also have to understand your geographical location is Sundarban, and Sundarban is, I'm very much aware of that area. And when you, if you go first with the survey, people will not be very eager to respond to you, because
Okay,
in
ma'am.
in research we have usually on ground research which deals with on-ground data. Their sequential exploratory works very well, because first you have to go to that community, build a rapport with them, make them feel that they are with you, you are there to help them understand them. They do not understand research. So if you go and tell
Yes,
them
ma'am.
that I am here to do a research, they will not answer you. You have to tell them that I'm here to learn more about you, understand more about you. Because the moment you use the term research, they feel that you are there for the government and government doesn't do anything.
Okay.
Yeah, and you are there with the people, with the government side. You have some vested interest. You are collecting the data for them, so you can't. So there, just you. I'm not sure that whether you will be able to even get any responses in the first hand with the survey. Even the people will not be interested. But yes, if in the first stage you are able to build that understanding through conversation, both FGD and IDI, try to understand it. And Ipshita, do remember, when you are doing a field work, it has not have to. You might have a structure of your variables as well as your discussion guide. But when you are posing a question to the people or the participant, it cannot be as direct. Right.
Okay.
you have
Yes,
to
ma'am.
try it with their know-how. So আপনি কেমন আছেন, ভালো আছেন,
হ্যাঁ,
তো আপনার কেমন চলছে? So if you want to know about their occupation, so don't
yes.
directly ask আপনি কত টাকা কামাচ্ছেন বললে,
No,
or
no,
they will never
no.
answer. So you just
They-
ask them সবকিছু ঠিক চলছে তো, কাজকর্ম কেমন চলছে? তো
Right.
you have to twine your questions. You know that it's your question, but you will put it along with many things together. So their sequential exploratory will work rather than doing an MGD. So when you start building that, and now people know that you are coming there for quite some time for some work and all, then give a questionnaire or then take a survey. Then people will be more than keen.
More. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there was a question from Novina Chakravarti. Do I have a communication? Yeah. Can you just unmute and tell me your question? I think in the chat it has come. Novina, are you there?
Rubina, you can unmute. No, I think.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am.
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear
Just
you,
I want to
Novina.
ask you one question, ma'am. Just
No, I can't. I can't
doing a
hear you,
research
Novina.
tracing the
It's
journey of female leads.
Rubina, your
your voice is cracking,
Am I
Novina.
audible enough, ma'am?
No, your voice is cracking.
Okay. Let me take asking you from in another computer.
you can type.
Sure.
If you have any question, you just can type.
Yeah, we'll be more than
Can
happy
you
to
hear
take
me,
it.
ma'am? I'm just key into a different laptop.
Yeah. Better. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Ma'am, I have a question regarding that I'm doing one research on a tracing the female leads of a particular filmmaker. Fine. Journey of female leads, their character graph. Fine. So my study is basically what that my method would be what I'm taking as a qualitative and an exploratory research, where I'm using two theories, like suppose auteur theory and framing theory. For that, maybe through frame, I will trace the journey and the character graph of that particular characters, so that I will do with exploratory, and where I will use the method of, first I will use two theories, auteur and framing theory, plus I will use FGD and some interview of a particular people, those who worked with the director. So that will be my method. Ma'am, is that valid for the particular process using framing theory and auteur?
Auteur and framing theories are very well-known theories for understanding or mapping the journey. Can
Ma'am,
you hear
unable
me?
to hear you properly.
Others can hear me?
Yes, man, you are fine. I think.
Yeah. Novina, can you hear me now?
Hello.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Please, can you?
Yeah. So, and auteur theory and framing theories are like very relevant theories that's been used in film studies and film work. That's not at all a problem. But here you have to also understand when you are trying to map your journey, rather than going for FGD or in-depth interviews, why don't you also think about ethnography?
Ethnographic. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, ma'am.
Because ethnography also talks about understanding or mapping the journey over a period of time.
Exactly.
And it doesn't include. So you can blend in the first segment with an ethnography where you are just without saying or without talking to them, just understanding their body of work through observation and time, and you are observing it with ethical consideration in place for a period of time, maybe 3 months or 6 months, and then you can top it up with an in-depth interview.
Okay.
That
Okay.
will make more
So,
sense.
ma'am, after using those two theories, I will use ethnographic study, and after that, if I'll do the interview or maybe a study of FGD or maybe group of people, then would be a clear graph will be there. Would that be?
I'm just proposing, just see to
Yeah.
it if it makes sense in your work.
Okay.
Because
Actually,
I feel that at least doing one will not help you. You are talking about film person or woman who have been substantially working and has a body of work. So first,
Yeah.
let's check out and let's observe their body of work. what they are trying to depict through their body of work over a period of time. And then let's find out, talking or engaging in a conversation with them, that what is their observation and is there any deviation from the observation?
Okay, ma'am. Sure. Thank you so much, ma'am. Just, maybe meanwhile, I'll just I'll discuss with all these things, because now I'm getting some idea over it. Thank you so much for guiding me, sir.
Yes, yes. Welcome. Anytime. Any other questions in the chat or anything? No worries. I will be having a quick Q&A sessions and I will be guiding you through that. So now, just a time for a quick recap. I have already blabbered a lot, doing a lot of bug, single-sided and single-handedly. So let's see, we have talked about some methods, and we have talked about quantitative, mixed method, qualitative, and we have talked about how to blend all of them, how they work individually in silos, and how to go about it, which methods, how to use it, how we can go ahead on using different methods and methodology, and what type of patterns or statistical interpretation analysis that we can do. Now, I will try to go in more in depth in quantitative and understand how we can actually analyze, frame, and understand the patterns of data. So are we good till this so far? Can I assume that we are good?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So moving on to the next section, which is like, this is your entire research process in brief. So when you are following your PhD, these are the stages that you will go through. So here, this research process is kept in mind, or the flowchart is kept in mind, considering that we are talking about in this section research methodology quantitative. So I have to first define the research problem. Once my research problem or research area is identified, or research gap is identified, or purpose of my research is identified, then I review a lot of literatures relevant to that area of the study, review previous findings. From reviewing of literature, I will be able to theorize or conceptualize my variables of the study. Now here you have to understand, you do not create theoretical framework. Theoretical frameworks are already existing. What you create as a researcher is conceptual framework. Now, what does conceptual framework means? Conceptual framework means that you find out through your literature search some relevant theory. Now, the way how Navanita was telling me that author theories or framework theory is what she has identified as of now to work on your research. Similarly, if you are working on different domain, you might have critical discourse theory, aging theory, gender theory, then technological aspect. There are a lot of diffusion of innovation theory, social constructivist theory, then social identity theory. So all these theories are there. Considering your research area and literature review, you will come up with certain theories which will look very identical or which will resonate with your research. Now, once you identify those theory, check into the variables, what they have used in that theory. You try to create or borrow those variables from those studies and try to create your own framework that will suffice your research. Now here, I cannot create a new variables of studies totally, which is not existing or which the theories, existing literatures or theories have not used, because to test those construct is a bigger picture. Testing of construct or testing of variables is not the same, right? So there I have to test the construct, and then I will look into creating my conceptual framework through the variables or from the theories or the variables. If you do not get any theories also, if your study is very new and the theories are very restricted, then also you can read the literature that work has been done the contemporary work has been done in your studies, and there you will try to find out those very relatable variables that can work for your study. Now you create a conceptual framework. Now, once the conceptual framework is created, you frame hypothesis for each of the variables under the study. Once your hypothesis is done, then you will create the design of the study. Now the blueprint has been prepared. So the blueprint is like you use either sequential exploratory, explanatory, you use descriptive research design, which is solely quantitative. So you will choose any type of design that you want to imply in your study. And based on your research design, you will collect the data. So if you have done only descriptive research design quantitative, then you will go for only survey. If you have chosen exploratory sequential, then you will go ahead with first qualitative, then quantitative, explanatory, then first quantitative survey, then qualitative, FGD, in-depth interviews like that. And then you will use those data to analyze or test the hypothesis, finally interpreting your result. So this is in mota your research process in the form of a flowchart. So here I have started with review literature. I have directly gone to formulation of hypothesis because we are talking about research methodology quantitative. Had that been a qualitative study, then there would have been research question, then moving ahead to formulations of hypothesis. But in quantitative, in a descriptive research design, particularly when we are doing a quantitative study, we are more focused on testing the hypothesis. So this is a flowchart that you will get. Now moving ahead, I can assume we guys are doing okay so far, right? So Momita, are we allowed to take a break or shall we continue?
We can take 5 minutes of break.
Yeah. So are we allowed to take a 5 minutes break and then we can resume?
5 minutes.
Works? Can you go ahead with the 5 minutes break?
Yeah, ma'am. Am I? You hear me?
Yeah, your voice was also yeah.
5 minutes of break.
Okay, sure. So before we deep dive into the quantitative concepts, let's come back in 5 minutes. Yeah. Sure.
Ma'am, we can start.
Sure. So, now we have talked about the design, the methods, what we will use, and how we will go about our study. And we have also talked about the journey of the entire research process or the flow of it when we are doing a quantitative research. So, when we are doing a quantitative research, we also have to understand the concepts or the statistical concepts that has been used in the data analysis. So, like to make you or to come to you till this point, I have also discussed some foundational understanding which you might already have, and I'm just adding or acting as more top up to it. I would also like to add some foundational concepts, understanding to your statistical concepts, and which might also act a little top up to your understanding. So let's first understand what are the key terms that we use in statistics and what do we understand when we talk about all these key terms. So we usually, in a very lay person's language, we talk about population. When from the population, the sample comes in, and we do descriptive stats, we do inferential statistics. So, what does this mean? So, the figure in the left side talks about population and sample. Population means anything which is very large, but here also we have to know that population is not something that is evolving or emerging in silo. The population actually comes, if you just see below, the universe. So it's like a huge, as the name universe says, it means that it's an amalgamation of a huge data and a data sets which talks about the emergence of the population or the population of the study. So here, the population means or universe means that you are talking about a huge set of data, cloud or a universe of data from where the population comes in, which is also infinite but still countable, right? But universe is uncountable. So from there, from the population, we cannot work with the population data. So that's why we go for sample, and the process of collecting the data from population and getting our sample is said as sampling. So here on the right side, you can see that the visualization is done, and it says sampling is the process from where we collect the sample from the population. Now, what does these two domains, descriptive and inferential, mean? So when we work on sample, we describe our sample. How do I describe the sample? I describe the sample or the data set through different statistics. So that is the way how I describe the data. But when I, from the sample, try to infer about or try to find out some more information about my population, that is the inferential statistics. So all the hypothesis testing that you do, the hypothesis and the data collection, you create an hypothesis, you collect the data, you test the data, are a part of inferential statistics. You describe the data. Now, how do you describe the data will be talked about through in the next slide, where I'm talking about describing of the data, and the data is selected through different ways. So let's first move into the measures of the data, or how do we look into the data? So what type of data we get? So sometimes we might come across categorical data. Categorical data means your gender, your name, your favorite color, what do I say? Your locality, where is your location, your address, all these comes under categorical data. Your economic status, your income range, your what marks you have scored, what's your average, what do I say? How long you have been in that place. So all these are also a data which is not, you can actually code them. Some has no meaning of the coding, The other has certain meaning towards it. So these are categorized in qualitative data, basically nominal and ordinal measure. Then you have quantitative data, which is like interval and ratio data. They can be discrete and continuous. Discrete means you will get a value. They are quantitative data. So if I ask you a question, how many members do you have in your family? How many person has been coming in this place in the last 5 minutes? All this will be discrete value. You won't answer me like 3.5, 2.5, right? 15.5, you will say me a discrete value. These are quantitative data. So number of students in the class, numbers of workers or employee in an organization, number of house in the street, number of family members in a family, number of people are going for a movie, people, number of person, all these are whole numbers, discrete data. And continuous data are data which comes in between the intervals. Now, in between the intervals means there is an interval of 1 and 2. Continuous data will be like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then moving ahead 1.9 to 2.0. So 1 and 2 are discrete data. In between the interval lies my continuous data. So if I ask you to tell me your height, weight, your marks, what's your the average family income, all this will not be a whole number. It will be in some decimal points, and that talks about taking the value in between the intervals. That type of data are purely quantitative data, where you come across these set of data sets where you do not have to code it as 1, 2, 3. So if you have gender, if you have color, if you have identity, you have different notions or age, then there we have to capture it through converting the data in certain codes. But in case of the examples that I've given below, height, weight, temperature, speed of the car, and then your number of people in an organization, by virtue of its characteristics, they are quantitative. You do not have to code it. So this is how, and the data divisions have been made, measures are been made. So we have 4 measures, which is nominal, ordinal, which are primarily the qualitative measure, and your interval and ratio, which are quantitative measures, where your discrete and continuous type of data comes in picture. So now you can see that when you know the measurement or the levels of the measurement of your data, you automatically know what sort of descriptive statistics you can use on those data set, and you can what sort of visualization techniques you can imply or use on conducting, or graphs you can use on doing that data set, or you to show that data set. So here, when your data is nominal means that the data is, by virtue of its characteristics, it's qualitative. So here, if I ask you what's your gender, then I'm making you answer in either categorical way. So it can be male, female, other, third gender, right? So I have 3 options for you. When I ask you what's your favorite color, it can be any of the color. So red, blue, orange, yellow, anything, right? So here I try to code this data as 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0, 1, or 0, 1, 2, based on the responses that I have got. Now, the coding of the data here has no rationale. I mean, I have not intentionally, there is no intention behind coding male as one or female as other. And the order of this data is not, or the coding is not 0.5 or 0.1. It's discrete, it's full number. So here there is no rationale or logic behind coding that data. That sort of data, when we encounter, are nominal, and we have coded into certain values. So that coding, the descriptive stats that can be done, or the basic statistical analysis that can be done with a nominal data, is you can always count the frequency. Count the frequency means if I ask you what's your favorite color and 4 color emerged, red, blue, white, and black, then I might say that, okay, black has the highest frequency, followed by white, followed by blue, followed by red. So black is the most favorite color, and blue, red is the least favorite color of the masses. How do I collect it? Based on your responses, and I have counted the frequency. Now, once I count the frequency, I can also tell you from the number of people. So if there are 30 people attending the FDP, then I can say that out of 30 people, if 15 of them has said that black is their favorite color, then 50% I can find out through percentages. So when you have nominal data, the descriptive stats that you can use is always frequency and percentages, nothing else, because that is a categorical or a qualitative data, and you can't do any sort of statistical analysis to it. And the representation through which you can represent it in your paper or in your work is bar diagram or a pie diagram. So if it's a frequencies, go for a bar diagram. If it is a percentage representation, go for a pie diagram. The pie slices comes very well when the data is in percentage. Now ordinal. Ordinal is also again a qualitative data, but here numbering or assigning codes or numbers to your to your response has a meaning to it. So example is when you are ranking students based on their performances, when you are ranking when you are ranking people based on their work. So the work can be excellent, the work can be below par, right? So there your grading or your ranking or your denotion will be 1 for the least and 5 for the best. So here what happens, unlike nominal, the ranking or the numbering has certain rationale behind it. So that's what, when you are saying 1 year, I mean it is least required, and when you are saying 5, then it is the most required thing. So here you have to choose that what ranking or what what ranking, what way how you want to represent it. So when it's ordinal, that means the value that is assigned to anyone or any situation has certain meaning to it. But when it is nominal, it's a random assigning of the value. So there is no rationale behind allocating red as 1 or black as 5. But if the same has been an ordinal scale, then red 1 means it's the least preferred and black 5 means it's the most preferred. So similarly, when your data set measure is in ranks or in Likert scale, or you are assessing it through any preconceived notions where you have certain grading patterns to it, then the ordinal scale, you can count the frequency, you can calculate the mode, which one has repeated itself for the highest number of time. You can find out median, because with the ranking, calculation of mean is not possible, or it is not legitimate to calculate the mean, because the data is not uniform. It's talking about the position of the data. So there you will go for median and percentile. And the way how you will represent it, of course, bar pie. And there is a visual representation called stem and leaf plot. That can happen in SPSS and in R programming or any of the good softwares that you can do. That way you can represent it through your ordinal data. So ordinal is one step ahead of nominal, but that is still a categorical data. So that's why the descriptive stats that can be used to represent an ordinal data has little evolved than the nominal. We have moved ahead from frequency, percentages, mode to median and percentile. But do remember, both of them are positional averages. Now with interval and ratio scale, both of them are fully quantitative. The difference is interval does not recognizes the zero value, whereas the ratio gives recognition to the zero value. So there are a lot of examples for interval and ratio data. So if we see that the average earning of a company or the average profit of a company has not increased anything, and from the first year to second year is 0, there it doesn't mean anything for the person. It may mean for the client, but there is no growth, but that 0 growth has of no impact for the person who is taking care of the company or the owner of the company. So in that case, interval scale is marked. But in case of ratio, it is purely mathematical data. So all type of statistical operations. So 0 has lot of meaning to it. So when we talk about temperature being 0 degrees centigrade, when we talk about the distance or the grading between them, between the relationship is 0, all this holds quite a meaning when it is ratio measure. So in case of descriptive stats, what sort of descriptive stats can be done in interval as well as ratio data? Interval is also a quantitative data. So there are a lot of possibilities that happen. Usually subtraction and addition is possible in interval data, but the mode of multiplication and division specifically is not possible in interval data. So we will go ahead with, we have additionally, considering its quantitative nature, apart from median, mode, and frequency in interval data, we can do mean and standard deviation. But in ratio data, although I have written mean and standard deviation, there are a whole lot of possibilities of conducting all sort of quantitative. So basically, if you have ratio data, then you can do correlation, then you can do mean, median, mode, and then you can do variance, then you can do skewness, you can do kurtosis, all sort of quantitative descriptive analysis in quantitative data when your data is ratio. So moving ahead, what are the descriptive statistics that we do in, in your quantitative, in research, in quantitative research primarily? So the descriptive stats that we work in quantitative research are divided in 3 sections: central tendency, dispersion, and shape. And in the shape, we will also talk about the association. So there are 4 sections in your descriptive statistics. So when I say you describe about yourself, so it means that you are talking about your address, your name, your experience, what you teach, which stage you are in research. So similarly, when data has to describe themselves, they will talk about their tendency to being in the center point, how much they are deviated from the center point, how do they deviate, whether they deviate horizontally or vertically, and how much they are related with the other data set. So when you try to understand the center point of the data, then we use central tendency to measure or to describe the data. So usually what do we use? We use mean, median, mode. We know it very well, how to calculate it, how to get through it. There are special cases of mean, geometric mean and harmonic mean that we use. So all these sort of means are used to describe the data. So when we also describe the data using measures of dispersion. The 2 very widely used measures, although there are a lot of measures of dispersion, the 2 or 3 measures of dispersion that we very widely use to talk about or describe about our data in descriptive statistics are variance, range, and standard deviation. So if my standard deviation is very less, then we infer the standard deviation in context to mean of the data. Because when we say that standard deviation is less, then we say that the dispersion or the scatteredness of the data from the mean is less. So that's what standard deviation talks about. Variance is the square of the standard deviation. So variance has mathematical importance, but it talks about the variability of the data inside, how much the data is close to each other or they are scattered. Talks about the internal turbulence of the data. And in dispersion, we talks about the most widely used measure is range, which talks about the difference between the highest and the lowest value in the data set. So what's your highest value in the data set and what's your lowest value? What's the difference? How far they are? That is been said by range. So now we are still continuing with describing the data. So central tendency is just talking about your name and your background. Dispersion talks about your address as well as your experience and how much you know about and how much you are close to your data set as well as your center point has been said by skewness and kurtosis. So if you have if you belong from a particular place and you are still working in that place, then your skewness will be very less. Then you are near to your roots, but you come from a different place and you are working in a different place, like me, I am not from basically from Maharashtra, but because of owing to work purpose, I'm there in Maharashtra. So there, my skewness will be very high. I have come up from my roots and I have dislocated myself and I am in a different place. So data also happens to be like that. They behave like us. So it's like you are uprooting yourself from your base and you are going and sharing your new identity. There, the chances of you being scattered from your roots is very high. So you can see the skewness can be positive, negative, or zero. Zero means you are perfectly in align with your base and you are in tandem. But when you are very here, positive and negative do not means any right or wrong, but here it means that you are scattered from your base or your root. That talks about the skewness. Kurtosis, which is the horizontal in horizontal plane, how the data is moving. So that talks about the skewness of the data set. And kurtosis talks about whether your data are creating a perfect bell-shaped curve. So anything we work is actually it's more about that whether you want to validate it through your what do I say through the whether your data is forming a bell-shaped curve or not. So if your data is very steep, so the or a upward and downward movement of the data is called as kurtosis, where the data is not moving horizontally over the plane, rather it is moving up and down and upper niche. It's to and fro movement. So that is said as kurtosis, and there are three ways how we can say the data. So if the data is moving very scattered as well as up and down, then you will find that the tail is very flattened towards the curve and kurtosis is less than 3. So the value of kurtosis will be less than 3, which is said as platykatic. If the data is or the kurtosis is equal to 3, that means your data is perfectly symmetrical and it is forming a bell-shaped curve. But if it is more than 3, so 3 is a benchmark for a bell-shaped curve, and anything more than that is it's creating a steep rise, which is leptokartic. And anything which is less than 3, which is kurtosis, which talks about platykartic, that means it is more flatter towards the tail. So these are the three measures of quantitative to describe your data. So when you get the data, you try to calculate mean, median, mode, variance, standard deviation, skewness, kurtosis, range of the data to just describe how your data looks like, the way how we introduce ourselves when we meet anyone or strangers in our life to tell about what we do and what's our interest. So this is all about the techniques that we use to describe the data. Are we good so far? Do we have any questions so far? If I may address, so that I can go ahead with some deep diving into data further.
Have any queries, you can unmute.
Yeah, I got an answer. Okay. Rakesh says good so far. Thank you. Yep. Someone else, if any questions?
I think it's fine, ma'am.
Okay, sure. So now let's move into taking a more deep dive into the data sets, how we can analyze or how we can look into the data. So considering that, let's move into understanding the variables of our study. So it is very important when we are doing any sort of research work, we understand that what is our independent and dependent variable, whether our study has these variables or whether our study is agnostic of these variables. Why? Because when we are doing a study, it is important that whether the study is been impacted by some variables or what are those variables, identification of variables are very important. Now, independent variables basically are whatever is our research problem. If we identify the variables like independent variables, then that variable help us identify or understand what are the variables that is impacting our study, and the variable that is getting impacted becomes my dependent variable. So if I say that I will take you through the examples of how independent variable and dependent variable works. But basically, it is very important to first, in the first hand, when you are doing or framing a hypothesis or identifying the variables of your study through literature review, please try, and you are interested in doing a quantitative research, try to identify independent and dependent variable. Although there are multivariate analysis that happens or techniques in quantitative research, where this step is not very important because they are interdependent variable, where independent and dependent identification is not that much of important. They are internally intertwined and interdependent on each other, but still we are not covering till that higher part. To the basics, if you want to go ahead with a basic quantitative technique like regression, which is like a go-to technique for each and every research in social science. So there, identifying the cause and what is affecting the cause is very important. That's why the regression is also said as cause and effect. So the cause is my dependent variable, which is getting impacted by difference effect. So if I say that the marks, what you score is been affected by the time that you spend in studying that, the classes you have attended, number of classes you have attended, and the concepts that has been cleared. So here the marks is not directly impacted only by one causes effect, but there are a lot of causes that is impacting the marks. So their marks is a dependent variable which is getting impacted by multiple variables. So we can have multiple independent variable. Now we may have multiple dependent variable also. There the process of analysis change. But today in today's discussion, I will keep it very simple to make you understand a simple method which you will widely used in your research process, where we will talk about one dependent variable getting impacted by multiple independent variables. First with single independent and then moving ahead with the multiple independent variable. So here, overview of some statistical analysis that we use. So for descriptive, I have already talked about central tendency, dispersion, shape, and all of that. For correlational design, we use Pearson correlation or regression methods. And for experimental studies where we understand or where we try to find out the group difference, there we use either regression or one-way ANOVA. So identify the variable is very dependent. Descriptive, when we are doing a descriptive study, there is no need of identifying the dependent and independent variable. We are concerned only about describing the data. But in correlational designs, we may have dependent variables. We will have bivariate, but here also understanding the dependent is more important than understanding the independent or any other variable. And the group difference will be more sort of dependent and independent variable. This is what and how we look ahead for the data set. Now, let's come to the first, or what we can say is, if we have to go ahead with the, I'm sorry, it's going, I don't, yeah. If we have to go ahead with understanding the data sets or analyzing the data more, and I have also answered Shayak in the first part where he was asking me about correlation being the very basic, how can he go ahead about understanding or inferring about the population, there hypothesis testing is very important. So we will test the hypothesis today. We can use inferential statistics where we are using hypothesis and we are testing the hypothesis through different tests. Now, these are the 7 steps of hypothesis testing where we set, first we set our null and alternative hypothesis. Now, null hypothesis is something which is already existing through our literatures. Alternative hypothesis is not the alternative of null. Rather, we have so far understood every time ki if null is about getting the data, alternate is not about getting the data. It is alternative of the null. Actually, it is not. Alternative hypothesis is your researcher hypothesis that you want to validate through your research. That is alternative hypothesis. Now, once you frame your hypothesis or your research work, what sort of test to use. Now here, from the beginning, Lakshmi and many others have talked about, you were confused about which test to use when you have data. And majority of the time, since you are a social science researcher, so level of significance is something that we predefine. So that is always 95% or 0.05 p-value, which is already set level of significance. I will go ahead with the slide of decision rule, where you go ahead and do the decision rule, and then we collect this, we create a decision rule that beyond this level, if it comes less, we reject the null hypothesis, we fail to reject. That is the decision rule we create for ourselves based on the level of significance, and then we collect the sample, we analyze it with appropriate test, and we come to conclusion. Now moving ahead with our decision. So usually we use a p-value approach, we use certain softwares, and we use p-value approach to come up to our decision. So what is our decision? Our decision is either we reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Now there is no certain brownie points of not being able to reject the null hypothesis, because it cannot be forced that you will be able, after your data collection, you will be able to reject the null hypothesis. You might have 10 hypotheses or 5 hypotheses or 7 hypotheses where you are able to reject the null hypothesis for 3 out of 5 hypotheses, and 2 you are not able to reject the null hypothesis. So null hypothesis here means you are not able to go beyond your what has been prescribed in the literature under the current context. So it might happen. So suppose you are working in on-field data, it might happen that you are unable to reject your null hypothesis. So in that case, your rationale for not being able to reject your null hypothesis should be very strong. Yeah, you should be able to interpret or talk about it. That is the must in your entire framing of the work. So a small p. So here I am assuming, since we all are social sciences researcher, I'm assuming that your level of significance is 0.05, which is 95%. So here, if the p-value or the significance value of your study is less than 0.05, then your decision will be that you reject the null hypothesis. There is a strong evidence that whatever study variables you have incorporated, they are coming significant, and whatever you have assumed in your research or you have presumed, you are able to test it through statistical analysis. But if your p-value or the significance value is greater than the set level of significance, then that is somewhere that is getting weaker. Maybe because of your sample size, maybe because of the anonymity of the study. So it may come. So there you are rejecting your null alternative hypothesis, but we do not say that we reject our alternative hypothesis. We say that we fail to reject the null hypothesis, and that is the condition. Yes, Shayad, you may come up with your question.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, for my univariate analysis, there are 3 years, and I'm testing the hypothesis for 3 different years. So, but for some, I'm rejecting the null hypothesis. For some, I'm not being able to reject the null hypothesis. So how to draw the conclusion in that case?
So when you are not able to reject your null hypothesis, when you are rejecting the null hypothesis, that is something you are validating your framework, right? But when you are not able to reject your null hypothesis, in that case, you have to draw conclusion from your study variables and what you have faced in your data collection, and how it is not, your current context is not being able to justify the framework. So it has to come from your field work.
Okay. Thank you.
So contextualizing the current situation, since you said that yours is a longitudinal study and it is done in 3 years. So the condition, and I'm assuming at 2023, you are saying 3 years, that means it has also the COVID years included. Yeah. So
actually, I have excluded it. COVID.
Yeah. Okay, you have excluded. So had is that Yes. Is that creating an impact in your study? Is that creating any impact in your understanding of your study, or is that an area where which by excluding you have actually eliminated certain sort of data points that you have to talk about? So it is not a problematic to fail to reject the null hypothesis. It is more the ownership comes onto a researcher's place where you actually have to describe very well in your discussion that owing to what contextual situation you are bound, because rejecting a null hypothesis means you have sufficient evidence gathered in four of your study variables to propose that your hypothesis is true. But you are failing to reject your hypothesis means here you are not getting that sufficient evidences to support your hypothesis. And what are those conditions you have to talk about?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, I think I have a question in chat. Is there any handbook of mass communication research where which method is to be relevant examples, something which we can use to understand the research? Okay. There can be different, I don't know, but handbook of mass communication. So usually in mass communication studies, Keshav, there are not much of quantitative studies that has been done. But when you are talking about zoology and archaeology, these studies are more evolved in terms of post-positivist worldview, right? So mass communication studies have actually started holding their hands in quantitative research. And these days, many quantitative researchers are working towards it. So for your answer, which study to use in what, if you know the background of your work, then you are able to infer about that. I tried through my book of business statistics to somehow weave it through. I will give you the link. If you can get it, you will be able to understand a little bit more. But I haven't also dealt very in depth of many research techniques that can be done. Some I have mentioned in this FDP, some is the details have been mentioned in my book. But I assume that being a mass communication or communication domain researcher, that book will amply handhold you towards the basic techniques that you can get through. So, if I have answered your question rightly, then shall I move ahead?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Find that to fail null hypothesis, like is it fine? Like you said that if you fail to, because rejecting your null hypothesis means validating your framework. That is very important. But to do that, does it justify your work?
Of course. And no one wants to come into a scenario where you say that you have failed to reject a null hypothesis, but it's very tentative. If me as a researcher can't fix my research, when I'm doing a field research, I'm very bound to get very practical results where I'm failing to prove anything. It can be circumstantial, it can be lack of evidence. Now just understand, when you are doing very sensitive study, suppose queer research or in gender studies or any sensitive topic, then you might not be able to reach that much amount of sample. Your non-response rate may be very high. Whatever response that your study variables or your respondents are giving are also very much leading to some sort of biasness, or they are not very open to it. Then while framing or while hypothesizing or while testing those, you are bound not to get as what you are intending to. Right. So in those cases, if you are, that's what I say, if you have 5 hypotheses and if you are getting 3 hypotheses where you are supporting your framework, but in 2 cases where you are not able to support, that's perfectly fine. But it has to be rationalized it with a proper rationale. And that rationale has to be in tandem with the current literature that is, or the work that has already happened in that area. That has to be weaved through, because we as a statistician or we as a quantitative researcher, we do quantitative research, but here we are not very interested in creating any sort of biasness in the result, where it's like we will say that we will always reject the null hypothesis, because research is very contextual, it's very domain focused, as well as there is very what do I say, there are very different contexts to it where we can use the research. So not everything can be like straight jacketed or put in one window.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes. So for Keshav's question, so here some basic hypothesis testing that you can do when which type of test to use when you have certain data set. I try to put it in two parts. So in hypothesis testing, there are different tests. So if you have one sample and the sample size is less than 30, very small sample, then you can go ahead with t-test. And if you have one sample and the sample size is little large, more than 30, and you can go ahead and test it through z-test. But when you have two samples and one sample is categorical and another sample is quantitative, then you can go ahead with independent sample t-test. So to understand independent sample t-test, so I give you a question as if like, is the mark scored by students impacted by gender? Do gender has a role to play on the marks scored by students in class or in entrance score? So gender is a categorical variable where I'm assuming that here I'm considering two categories of gender. So if I have like male and female only, then seeing the impact of the gender on marks, I can go ahead with independent sample t-test. So suppose you are working on different example is you are working on understanding the perception of the people, whether they agree or disagree on certain on certain on certain grades that you have given. So the grades, whether they agree or disagree, I have two categories of it, and I want to see the impact of the grading on the marks that has been given. Then I can go ahead with independent sample. Pair t-test is about, we do pair t-test when I have a data. So suppose for conducting this FDP, I give you a question, set of questions. Before I conduct this FDP and I ask you that you want to appear in this FDP, so you just attempt this quiz. So you have attempted this quiz, which is out of 10 marks, right? And you scored some numbers from 1 to 10, 10 out of 10 or 1. So you get this. I'm not judging anything. I've given you a pre-test. Now, after the FDP is complete at 1:30 p.m., I'm again giving the same test paper. Now, in between the FDP, what happened? I have inducted the test before I conduct the FDP. And after I conduct the FDP, I inducted the same test. So if I want to know the efficiency or efficacy of this FDP towards your understanding and learning, then I have to do a paired sample t-test where 30 responses or 30 participants are responding to the question, basic research methods question, where I'm saying after conducting a pair t-test that while I assess the answer before the FDP, if it is lesser and incrementally after the FDP it has increased, then the FDP has a significant impact. And if it has decreased, that means whatever you have known, you are now more confused and it has not helped you anywhere and you are more confused about it, then the test will be non-significant. So this is how a paired sample t-test is used. So these are the tests of hypothesis testing that's mostly used in what do I say, in social science researchers, specifically independent sample t-test, and paired sample t-test. In between, independent sample has a restriction. The restriction is the categorical variable. I will have two variable. One variable will be quantitative, other will be categorical. In the categorical variable for independent sample, I have to have 2 categories. But suppose I have 3 categories, I am not able to conduct an independent sample. There, when I have 3 categorical variable categories, so per gender, if I'm using only male and female, comparing it with the marks, then I can use independent sample. But if I have 3 gender categories, male, female, and third gender or others, then I have to use ANOVA. So these are the ways how we determine the test. Of course, t-test is also a small sample test. Anything which is less than the sample size. So I have a very niche sample, very niche data set. I have framed a hypothesis. Want to go about it? There I use t-test. For z-test, I use when my sample goes beyond 30, but we don't use much of a z-test. Rather, we go for independent sample, paired sample, or ANOVA test. So these are the basic tests that we used in our data analysis. Now I can give you certain questions. These questions will help you even frame your questions of research and compare it with that what sort of research analysis or statistical analysis to use when you have these type of questions in your research. So when I ask you example, what's the typical blood pressure of a people in a given population? So if you want to understand certain pattern of a sample, certain way how the sample is behaving, or how the way your collected data is behaving, then the best statistical analysis tool is descriptive. You describe the data through mean, median, mode, through standard deviation, through variance, through skewness, through kurtosis. That's the better. If you want to understand the relationship between 2 variables, so you want to predict, you want to understand whether blood pressure has certainly having any impact or have any relation with the socioeconomic status of the people, then you can go ahead with predictive analytics. And if you want to understand the cause and effect relationship or group difference, so a certain community or a group is behaving. So you have divided your data set into A, B, C group, whether they are behaving similarly or differently, or is, the group C is getting impacted by group A or group B. In that case, you can either use ANOVA or regression. So here, based on your study technique, you understand how you are being able to work towards your research or which appropriate technique to use. Here, you have to be very cautious how you are going to use your data. So now, moving ahead to, I will discuss one technique very specifically here, which is regression. So when we talk about regression equation, we talk about 2 types of regression, which is simple and the other one is multiple. We are clear that simple means I have one independent variable and one dependent variable. So the example given here is research question. What is the effect of income on longevity? Right. So effect of income on longevity means I have one predictor and one outcome. Both the variable are continuous. That means quantitative. Multiple regression means I have one dependent variable, but I have more predictor. Predictor means independent that is able to predict about the outcome. So here, now what is the effect of income and minutes of exercise per day on longevity? So it is not only about income, it is also about how much you spend on your exercise, routine exercise that may help you to increase your longevity. So if I try to answer this sort of question, then multiple linear regression is very, very important. So let's work on some data and just look at it, how regressions look like. So when I have simple regression, then my simple linear regression equation will be like B0 plus B1 x1, where x is my independent variable, y x1 because I have only one independent variable and y is my dependent variable. That's why it is simple regression. But in multiple regression, I have multiple x1. You can see xn. Xn means the number of variables, independent variable go to n number. So here, I mean that I have one independent variable, two independent variable, three independent variable. Likewise, I frame my regression equation. B0 is the what? Slope, and B1 is the intercept. So we get linked to that variable. I will show you. It's a mathematical denotions of the variable, but I will tell you how it looks like when the output has been done. We have already talked about this introduction to regression equation, independent and dependent variables. So intercept and the slope. So let's take this example for simple regression. So here the simple regression means that I have one independent variable and one dependent variable. So here a real estate agent wants to examine the relationship between the selling price of a home and the size. So we all know we have our own home or houses where we know that even if we stay in a rented place, the rent of the place differs as per the size of the house. So if we are staying in a 1 BHK, the rent is less. If we are staying in a 3 BHK, the rent is high. So the size of the house actually sets the price of the house. So here my dependent variable is house price and my independent variable is square feet, which is the size. So as the size increases, the price is getting impacted. This is how we find out the dependent and the independent. So here, why price is my dependent? Because it is getting impacted by the size. So that's why the thing which is getting impacted becomes my dependent, and what is creating that impact is my independent variable. So here I have only. Now price of the house is not only dependent on the size of the house. It is also dependent on the community or the locality the house is located. It is also dependent on multiple factors. But here, to make you understand the simple regression concept, I have taken only one independent variable, which is the square feet of the house. Now I have this data set, house price and square feet. So you can see that in $1,000, the price of the house increases incrementally when the size increases from 1,400 square feet to 1,600 square feet, 1,700. So likewise, when there is an increase based on multiple factors, I have this data. So when I run this data, I get in Excel, I get this sort of output. So the output is divided in 3 steps: regression statistics, ANOVA, and intercept. So here I have demarcated, what do I say? Certain sections in the table for you to understand what does these data set actually implies and how can we actually interpret our result. So here when we are doing regression, I'm trying to find the cause and effect relationship. It is mostly correlational design. It's not a descriptive measure anymore. We have evolved. We are trying to find out the impact of one study variable on the other. Here, my study variables are size and house price. The study variables can be any variable in your study. So I will take the example of multiple regression also for you to understand. And there I will talk about how the multiple study variables can have an impact. So what are the when we run any statistical analysis, the interesting part is that we get multiple tables and we are clueless that which values are to be taken into account to analyze or interpret our results. Similarly with regression, when we run regression, we get multiple tables. So here I will show you which all to take into account. First, we will go ahead with R square. R square there, if we do the division, I get an R square value. Now, what does R square tells us? R square tells us how much variation in the dependent variable is caused by the independent variable. So here, my dependent variable was what? My dependent variable was house price of the houses, and my independent variable was square feet or the size. So how much impact does size has created on the price of the house is said by the R square value. So here I can easily say that 58% impact on the price of the house is caused by the size of the house. But there are still 42% which is unaccounted for. Now, For that 42%, I have to use multiple regression. So I have to incorporate more study variables to see whether they are impacting or increasing my R square incrementally. So this is about R square, which directly says how much impact is your independent variable creating on the dependent variable. R square value should range from 0 to 1. The more closer it is to 1, the variables that you have taken for your study are the right variables which you have chosen for. So when we look for regression or we try to do a what do I say? Cause and effect relationship or hypothesis testing, then it is very important that we choose our study variables very carefully through a good literature survey, because everything is very intertwined. If we don't do a very good literature research or literature search, and then if there is any difficulty in sharing or in finding the data set or in taking the data points or collecting the data, then the R square will get impacted and it will not be very closer to 1. Also, the R square get impacted and sometimes it get lesser than 1, especially in behavioral data set. When we are trying to gauge the attitude or the behavior of our responses, then behavior is a very complex study. So there, the R square is bound to be very lesser. So in case of mass communication studies also, you are not going to get a very fancy R square like 90% or something like that. But don't worry, that R square is also legitimate if you get 60 to 70%. That also says a good amount of impact on your dependent variable by your studies independent variable. Now, moving ahead, the next portion is how do we create a regression equation. Now, you see on the third table, you have a simple regression equation says y is equal to b0 plus b1 x1. So here, the coefficient column in the third table actually helps you to get your regression equation. So y is equal to what is your house price? So house price is 98.24833, which is the intercept value B0, plus B1 is the slope value, which is the square feet coefficient value 0.10977, and x1 is the square feet. So here in this study, you can also changing the square feet. So if you have highest square feet is 2,700, for which the price is given, from the equation, you can actually estimate the house price for that locality for 3,500 using your regression. And you can be 58%, close to 60% sure that your estimation of the house price will be right, because your R square is 58.082, which is like telling you that 58% your estimation will be correct. Now, if you want to be 80% or 90% correct, then you have to go ahead with incorporating multiple variables in your study. So how do we incorporate multiple variables in your study? So just see how it has been predicted for 2000 square feet. So incorporated 2000 here, and I get the estimated house price for this one for 2000 square feet. But it is 58% correct, because your R square says that 58% impact on the study variables is caused by, or independent variable can be studied, can be shown by independent variable. But if you want to go closer, then let's take another scenario, and which is like more in your area. So here there are markets, and I am including increasing my independent variable. So multiple regression comes into picture. So what is multiple regression tells about? So there are different markets, and there are weekly gross revenue earned in the market through television and newspaper advertising. So here I want to see that whether the newspaper and television advertising are creating any sort of impact on the revenue or the weekly gross revenue of certain target market. So here, what did I do? In the revenue, now revenue is getting impacted. So that is my dependent variable. and television and newspaper advertisings are my independent variable that is creating that impact on the revenue. Now, how much impact it is creating? How will I able to know that whether it is creating a direct impact or how can I account for it? Let's look into the data set through regression. So I've run the regression and I got this output. Now see, again, the same sort of output, but I will use those for implication or for writing my interpretation, those which I have highlighted in yellow. So how do I interpret it? Number one, first in the summary output, in the first table of regression stats, I will look into R square, and don't bother about it. In the next slide, I have written the interpretation for you. So you will have a hands-on reference. Try to understand first. So I have weekly gross revenue in different markets and in 8 markets, and that is been impacted. Now I want to study whether those gross revenue are getting impacted through television and newspaper advertising. So here, what did I do? I ran a regression analysis. I get a R square of 0.932229532. So if I round it off to 2 places decimal, it's like 93.2%. So I am able to now infer that yes, both the television and newspaper advertising are impacting the weekly gross revenue of those 8 markets. Now, I have said that the more the R square is closer to 1, the better the study variables are. So here, both the study variables, independent variables, are showing an impact of 93%. So that means they are causing a substantial impact on the revenue or the weekly gross revenue earned in the 8 market. So they are creating a huge impact on the revenue is what the regression R square tells us. Now, the coefficient table, first let's go to the third table in the coefficient table. From here, I can actually tell you the regression equation. So now my regression equation will be y is equal to b0 plus b1 x1 and b2 x2. Why b1 x1 and b2 x2? Because I have 2 independent variables. X1 is television advertising and x2 is newspaper advertising. So here b0 will be my negative value, which is minus 42.56. Y is equal to weekly gross revenue, and weekly gross revenue is equal to minus 42.56 plus B1 will be television advertising coefficient 22.40 multiplied by television ad plus 19.49 multiplied by newspaper ad. So this is my regression equation. Now, why I have highlighted the t-stats column and the p-value column, and why I have highlighted the f-value column and the significance f-value column. Do remember this f-value and the significance f-value. So if here the significance value is less than 0.05, it means that whatever equation we are creating for regression is an efficient one. If the significance value is more than 0.05, then we say that the overall regression relationship do not exist and it is no point of conducting regression with this data set. They will never be able to give you a right estimation. So here the significance value to be less than 0.05 is very, very important for understanding. And these t-stats as well as these two p-values coming less than 0.05 is important because individually here it talks about individual relationship of first independent variable with the dependent variable, then the second independent variable with the dependent variable. So here television advertising p-value coming less than 0.05 means that television advertising is significantly creating an impact on weekly gross revenue, as well as newspaper advertising 0.003 again less than 0.05 says that it is also significantly creating an impact on what? Your weekly gross revenue. Since we have multiple independent variable here, it is very important to talk about each individual's relationship with the dependent variable, because in the first step, 93.2% impact is been showcased or talked by what has been given a wholesome impact. Here we are not able to talk about the impact individually. Here I'm saying that both of them, television and newspaper ad, cumulatively has impacted 93% to the revenue. But whether individually has a significant impact or not is being created or is been told by this p-value. T-stats is the recorded, what do I say, test that has been used to test the individual relationship. So we have to use or we have to record T-stats, but the implication is actually drawn from the p-value. And the equation that we have created, is it a good equation and does it help in estimating properly, has been also validated through the F significance value. So if the significance value associated with F stats is less than 0.5, then the regression relationship between the independent and the dependent variable actually literally exists. So I have written in the next slide, which I will hand it over to you, the way how we write the interpretation for regression. So now, what business implication or what implication does this regression equation makes? The point D talks about it. Management feel confident that if they increase their spend on television and newspaper advertising, that will incrementally increase the gross revenue. Hence, the company will now focus on spending the advertisement on television and newspaper, rather exploring on any other platforms, at least for that target market. So this is how the interpretation can be written for regression. It will be given to you, and I hope you will be able to write. So I have almost come to an end of this and section. And if you want to know more about all the hypothesis testing, and some of you were asking about some hand-holding guide. This book has already come up in the market. Currently, it is showing out of stock in Amazon. I don't know who good people have already purchased this, but it will be. I have contacted with the publisher. They are going to make it in stock in a week's time in Amazon. You can get a paperback. It's a very pocket-friendly book, and it will handhold you through different approaches of statistics. So basically, I have segmented it in 4 steps. Since in 3 hours time, it is not possible to help you guide through quantitative study and in online platform through all the studies. But still, I have tried to give you an overview and understanding. But trust me, this book will help you understand and do the analysis. First, using a basic scientific calculator or a basic calculator. Second, using Excel. Third, using SPSS. And fourth, using R programming. So if you really want to upskill in your life and understand different statistical software to resolve this, you can get this book, as well as there are screenshots actually, and there are screenshots of the softwares, and step-by-step guide has been shown. There are cases, there are data sets, which once you buy this book through the digital app access, you will be able to resolve and you can work. Also, you can try a lot of sum solving using those data sets in Excel. It's very pocket friendly. Cengage has kept it at a price of 499. I think we spend more on our lunches and dinners outside than getting this book. So if you feel that, also I have given in the next PPT the link to the ebook. So if you are not much of a paperback person, the e-copy is also available. So you can click onto this link and you can actually, I will share this PPT with Momita and Shayab, and you can actually go ahead and you can buy this ebook also. The ebook is also very elaborate and you will be able to get that. So I hope the FDP was of some benefit to you. You can use it. Further, if you can, with this much of understanding, if you just read the book, you will be more, you can map what you have heard and learned in this FDP And trust me, why I'm recommending this book to you all, because there has been least books of statistical analysis in the market, which is more of reader centric. All the statisticians of the world, of my community, are more data centric. So they try to make the concept very heavily statistical worded, and it becomes more jargon, and they are more jargonized. So I have tried my best to de-jargonize it and put it in a very simple language, which will handhold. So it will handhold you with chi-square test, non-parametric test. It will handhold you with correlation regression. It will handhold you with ANOVA one-way, two-way. It will handhold you with all sort of descriptive analysis that we have talked, and it will handhold you with all sort of distributions. So over to you now. Thank you so much for accommodating me for 3 hours, almost 2.5 hours, 3 hours. And I hope you will be able to benefit through it. I open the floor for questions if you have any doubts. And please, rather than putting it on chat, it's a moment of conversation. I can interact with you. Open your mics and please talk to me. I mean, it's not necessary you open your cameras, but at least mic could be open so that we can put up some questions. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this comprehensive today's session. I think Shayuk is having another question. Shayuk, just go ahead with your question.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I actually came across this chart where we are actually people who are struggling with designing the sample size. Could they refer to this chart? I have put it in the chat box.
Margin of error and then population size and
95%
confidence
and
interval.
90.
Shai, please don't refer to this. Rather, I will say go to sample size calculator.
Okay.
So there are different sample size calculator, online sample size calculator available. If I am not wrong in recalling, then there is a very good, I'm writing it in the chat. It's called RAWSOC. So they have the good sample size calculator where you can put your tentative population and then the confidence interval where you are using. So if you are working in health sciences or health communication, then your health or in that, then your confidence interval will be 99%. And likewise, if you are doing in a social sciences communication 95%, you put that, they will give you a estimated sample size that you should take.
Okay. And ma'am,
And
can
you
I
can
refer
also
that
put
particular
that.
software?
Yeah.
For
You
example.
can also put that reference that you have used a sample size calculator under this confidence interval in your thesis.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No question? There may be two probabilities. So now I'm a quantitative researcher. The first probability is that you have understood it well, and the second probability is that you have understood nothing. Right? So in those two scenarios, so now you have to tell me which one has more like higher probability.
I think we are getting so many messages. I think it's the first one, comprehensive one. I am very in this short term. I know I have been attending your classes. So obviously it's very difficult to wrap it up, but I think you have done wonderfully. And we are wrapping it up. If you have any other questions, you can go ahead, or we are concluding the session today.
Thank you, Ikshita.
Okay, so ma'am, today's session we have understanding the research concepts, selection of the right research approach, discussion on quantitative concepts, understanding the key statistical concepts, use of descriptive statistics for research, inferential statistics, hypothesis testing, inferential testing, understanding regression, applying regression to your research work, and obviously that we have attended so much. Any other questions that we have? Yes, we have. Excellent session, ma'am. Thank you so much. Bindu Samant is writing. Ipshita, it's very insightful. Many others. So, ma'am, thank you so much.
Thank you. I would request the convener of the session. I am just going to send you the PPT so that you please circulate it among the participants so that they can refer it to at least when they are working, and if they have some doubts, so they can come back and refer, because I tried to make it very comprehensive and crisp so that they can use it in their future work for referring it to. Thank you so much.
Comprehensive and elaborate presentation, ma'am. Yes.
Thank you.
Take
It's an honor. Yes. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.